God, you could tell a Ronstadt just go like that, and if they don't sing, it's not a Ronstadt.
Harmony in music making, harmony in family, harmony with the land, harmony with community, harmony with people on both sides of the border, service to community, state, country, and region. These have been the hallmarks of the Ronstadt family since Federico Ronstadt came to Tucson in 1882. The Ronstadts are a family of doers, but also one that shuns the limelight for its accomplishments.
The first Ronstadt to make it permanently in the United States was Fred. As a young man, I think he was only about 14 years old, and he came up here to apprentice as a blacksmith. Eventually became a wheelwright and ultimately started manufacturing buggies and wagons and those kinds of things. And ultimately that all evolved in the early 20th century into what for many, many years was by far the biggest and best known hardware store in southern Arizona, Ronstadt's hardware company.
I remember my grandparents well, and the hardware store, and the fun things we did down there. My dad and Uncle Gibby ran the store, and we used to go down, we just had the rodeo recently, the Fiesta de los Vaqueros. We used to go and watch it from upstairs in the hardware store. My grandfather's wagons ride in the rodeo parade today still. We all got to ride them when we were little in the parade.
My grandfather came here a couple of years, more or less, after Fred came here. And then Fred brought Amelia and bought Joe, the youngest, and set up home here, and then brought his father and mother. And so all the family was then reunited in Tucson. They all were ranchers.
Driving down through the ranches that were down near the end, near Babaquivari, and all of Grandpa and his brothers and his sister had ranches in that area. So that's a beautiful, beautiful place.
And the interesting thing about that, all four of them had houses on 6th Avenue, on the west side of 6th Avenue from 16th Street up to Speedway, and all the houses are still there today.
One of Fred's brothers, Jose Maria, widely known as Pepe, started another powerful branch of the Ronstadt dynasty.
He was a businessman and developed the Santa Margarita Ranch. He also was in the insurance business, and he was in politics. He's a county supervisor at one time, and he's postmaster at another time. He helped start he was one of the founders of the Southern Arizona Bank, which was for a long time the largest bank in Southern Arizona. And my father was Carlos. My father was very involved in developing the original water laws and original state land laws for the state on various appointments by various governors. And then after the war, he was head of a commission appointed by the president to investigate and eradicate foot and mouth disease in cattle in Mexico.
Fred came first at age 14 with his father, Frederick Augustus, and then subsequently he brought my grandfather, Richard, and my grandfather, Richard, went to work after coming here with the Southern Pacific. For a short while he was with his older brother in the wagon making business with Vasquez and Dalton, and then but he went to work for the Southern Pacific subsequently.
Another brother, Dick, his children became the owners of what was later Rexall drugstore, or the indirectly they stayed with the Rexall until it was sold.
My dad was unfortunately deaf, and so was his sister. My dad went to the Arizona State School for the Deaf and Blind here in Tucson. He was in the first graduating class, and then he attended the university for a short while. He was in business with his father, my grandfather. They had a feed and grain store in the Main Street area downtown for a good number of years. And he ended up working for Fuse Aircraft Company, who was very, very good to he and two other friends of his who were also deaf. And they ran the post office for Hughes Aircraft for years.
Still, the original Tucson arrival has had perhaps the most lasting impact on our city. A highly cultivated and multi-talented man, Fred Ronstadt set up the first symphonic group in Tucson's history, the Club Philharmonico, and with his brother Dick taught all of the players to play their instruments. He would later be one of the founding board members of the Tucson Symphony Orchestra and was a driving force behind the building of the Temple of Music and Art.
He used to get his instruments out and play his flute for us, play the piano, play his guitar, and sing. And all of that was wonderful to hear.
We'd have to be very, very quiet when it was Saturday afternoon, because that's when the Metropolitan Opera Company broadcast. And so we knew if we were going to go and visit, we'd have to sit down and just be very quiet and listen to the music.
Fred was married twice and had 4 children with each of his wives. The first family, with Sarah Levine, included a daughter who would become an international star of opera and art song, Luisa Espinel.
She'd sit down with us at the piano and show us how to do some of the little harmonies that we wanted to work out, a 2-part harmony. And she would tell us about some of the performances that she gave. And sometimes she'd let us try on her costumes. And her little Spanish slippers were so narrow, you can imagine that anyone could actually fit a foot in there. And she had fans, and she had earrings, and she had combs and mantillas.
Luisa collected and notated the Mexican folk songs her dad sang and presented them to the world as Canciones de mi Padre. Years later, her niece, Linda Ronstadt, would use the same title for her chart-topping collection of mariachi classics. Fred had 4 sons by his second wife, Lupe Dalton: Alfred, William, Gilbert, and Edward.
The one thing I remember about all the Ronstadts of that generation, those 4, they were gentlemen, and always an inspiration to me to be a member of a family that had people in it that were of that character.
My uncle Alfred, who was the other of those 4 brothers, lived in Mexico City. He went there as a young attorney, bilingual. A firm in Mexico City was looking for a young American attorney who was bilingual. He went there and was very successful.
Alfred had lost an arm in a hunting accident as a young boy, and I always admired how he managed his automobile with one arm, and it was not an automatic transmission, but he had to shift by hand and steer at the same time.
My Uncle William lived in Washington, D.C. area and in Duck River, Tennessee.
He was a naval intelligence officer, and he joined the Navy before I was born. He was stationed in Douglas for a while at a listening post during the Second World War. And they were concerned about traffic across that border, about materials, contraband material, war materials going out of the country, things coming in.
Gilbert Ronstadt was a quiet force in our city. He chaired Tucson's post-war planning committee after World War II and established the first sewage and waste treatment facilities here.
He wasn't sure whether he wanted to be known as the sewer commissioner, and then we have to address him as Monsieur.
He also served on the board of the Tucson-Mexico Exchange Commission and spearheaded efforts to preserve the Spanish missions of Sonora on both sides of the border.
I know that the San Javier project was something that he wanted to see happen, just because it had always been a part of our lives, that mission. And he wanted to make sure that it was going to continue to be something that could serve its parishioners, for a long time to come, and continue to be an active, living church, rather than some sort of museum.
With brother Edward, Gilbert ran the Ronstadt Hardware Company, providing equipment to ranches, mines, and everyone else until its close.
What's now all the homes in Marana, all those communities out there, those were all farms. Those were some of their very big customers. In those days, the hardware store had big giant tractors inside. They had big doors to let in the big tractors because they dealt with all the farmers in Marana and southern Arizona. You can still find some F. Ronstadt hardware windmills if you look around in southern Arizona. Daddy was busy and was very involved in the Boy Scout Council, and he and Jimmy were both there. Jimmy made it to Eagle Scout. We have pictures from when my parents were young of my dad with Boy Scouts up at Mount Lemmon.
And Ed loved to talk about scouts and scouting and what it had meant to him. Ed was also an avid, I will say, amateur archaeologist.
Edward was really the family historian, and he carried it all very close to his heart, and he had a good memory.
I suppose part of the legacy is that it hasn't ended, and it isn't going to in the foreseeable future, because they continue to have Ronstadts who become, active in this community in so many different ways. I mean, how many families can you think of that, had a chief of police, a director of parks and recreation? It just goes on and on and on. So that even if they don't become involved in civic affairs directly, necessarily, their musical heritage is clearly going to last for a very long time.
During my tenure, we had the most successful expansion of parks and recreation in the history of the city. And my staff and I worked real hard with community people to get that done. And got involved with Little League organizations and soccer organizations and the Bobby Sox and the adult leagues, and generated big support.
I came back and operated the farm and feedlot with my dad at the Agualinda Ramado until we sold. In about 1959, I organized and started a company with a partner, a schoolmate of mine, and developed New Pueblo Constructors into a large, heavy engineering contracting company, building highways and airports.
Known internationally as a musical star and locally as Gibby's daughter, singer Linda Ronstadt followed the family tradition, using her voice and celebrity to raise money for the San Javier Mission Restoration Project, the Desert Museum, the La Frontera Behavioral Health Organization, and the Tucson Philharmonia Youth Orchestra, among others. Out of her own pocket, she funded the construction of a shelter for the victims of spousal abuse and their children, operated by Casa de los Niños.
It was about 2 weeks into the academy, and I listened to some guy talk about the police mission. And prior to that time, people had talked about cops, and it was always, well, why do cops exist? Well, they exist to keep law and order and arrest people and so forth and so on. And this guy said, you can ask yourself lots and lots of questions, but the real purpose of police officers is to go into a terrible situation and make it not so terrible for the people that are experiencing it. He says that's what cops do. He says what that really means is that cops are helpers. And he says that really sounds stupid, but that's what cops do. And I never forgot that. And when I used to teach at the academy, that's what I would teach.
Casa de la Luz. We are the largest provider of hospice services in Pima County. It is sad to lose somebody that you love and care about, but what we get to do is hopefully make that be a better time for people so that they can enjoy what they have with their loved ones at that very, very precious time.
They're wonderful representatives of the bicultural nature of the region that we live in. And, you know, it's just, it's a wonderful success story in diversity, integration, call it whatever you want to call it.
Adiós, mujer. Adiós, para siempre.